Hi, welcome to this session on multimodal models part 1. My name is Manish Gupta and I'm a principal applied scientist at Microsoft. So let's get started with the session today. Okay. Um, this is a session on multimodal models, right? While multimodal models can actually mean several modalities, this session is going to be primarily focused on vision and language tasks. Also note that this session is more on multimodal understanding and less on generation to begin with. Of course, in the part 2, I'll start talking about generation, text generation specifically, where the input could be multimodal. But in this session, I'm going to focus more on multimodal content understanding, right? So what you see on the slide here are various vision and language tasks. There are several scenarios where information could be multimodal in nature, um, specifically text and images, right? So the most popular multimodal task I would say is visual question answering, where the input is an image and also a question along with that image. So is there something to cut the vegetables with? And this task is actually called as visual question answering, where given the image and the question, the idea is to select from a large set of answers, right? An understanding task is about selecting from a large set of answers, right? But a generation task would be to actually generate an answer text. Another related task is VCR or visual common sense reasoning, where given this image of a social situation, right, and a question, why is person 4 pointing at person 1? The idea is to be able to figure out from these 4 options which is the most correct option, most accurate answer, right? And then, as an extension to that task, people have also proposed, this second order task where, given an image and given the question and an answer that was chosen, what is the rationale? Why is it correct? Right? Why is the answer correct? Right? So both of them involve choosing one of the 4 possible options. Right? Here is yet another task where given an image and you see given a rectangle, you basically want to choose a piece of text saying, hey, well, this is guy in yellow dribbling ball, right? Referring expressions task. Yet another task is about caption-based image retrieval, where you have a particular caption, let's say this text caption, and then you have a large bunch of images, and you want to retrieve the most relevant images. Okay, so the idea is that here, of course, you want to basically encode the images and the text in a similar in a single space, so that you could actually compute similarity between them seamlessly and then do good image retrieval, right? So all of them basically involve encoding the image and encoding the text in some form, sometimes jointly, sometimes individually, but then at some level try to compute similarity. Okay. So now what I would do is to basically slowly start talking about the kind of models people have been using to solve these kinds of vision and language tasks. Of course, there are many other tasks, by the way, right? So for example, there's also multimodal fake tweet detection. So where the tweet could be multimodal in nature, there's an image, there's a text, and you want to figure out if this combined multimodal tweet is fake or not. Similarly, there are other tasks like hate speech detection. So there could be a multimodal document, and you want to figure out, let's say, a blog or again a tweet, right? And you want to figure out if combined overall, including the image and the text, is it hateful or not, right? So so given all of this, I'll start talking about models that people have built around trying to solve these multimodal tasks. So basically, how do you do multimodal understanding? Right? Now, to be able to do multimodal understanding, you need to encode both the image as well as the text. Now, text understanding, of course, you have done over multiple lectures in this course. Let me actually talk about how do you encode images nicely, right? So far, until 2020, let's say, people used to use convolution neural networks to encode images. People still use them, but what has become popular also is to basically use these vision transformers to encode images. Okay. So the idea is that given a particular image of this kind, you're going to first split it into fixed size patches. For example, this guy is basically split into fixed size 9 patches. And these patches are linearly embedded. So essentially, you have some sort of a projection which sort of embeds them linearly. So you have a embedding computed per patch. And then you also add positional embeddings to each of those patch embeddings, and you feed them the resultant vectors along with the CLS token to a transformer encoder. right? So that's basically the way these vision transformers work. So VIT, or the vision transformer model, basically takes an image, splits into fixed size patches, linearly embeds them, adds a position embedding, and passes it as input to the transformer encoder along with the CLS token. On the CLS token, you could, of course, attach a MLP head and use it for various classification purposes. For example, in this particular case, maybe you want to do a 1,000 class classification. So you've basically taken the image and you pass it through this transformer encoder, and you're going to attach a 1,000 sized output output layer, right? 1,000 neurons in the output. Okay. Now, VIT model and the transformer encoder is the standard encoder. You don't make no changes. Essentially, you just have the multi-head self-attention. You have the MLP feed-forward layer, and so on. Right. The VIT model comes in 3 different sizes: 12-layer, 24-layer, 32-layer, base, large, and huge sizes, with different hidden dimensions and number of attention heads, and so on. Right. The largest one is basically 632 million parameters. This model was pre-trained using obvious datasets, ImageNet 1K, ImageNet 21K, and JFT. Right. See, these models basically differ in terms of not just the base, large, and huge, the sizes, but they also differ in terms of the patch sizes that they take as input. So, for example, VIT L/16 basically takes 16 cross 16 input patch size. Right. So, of course, smaller patch size would mean larger sequence length, but there is basically a trade-off between, and then larger sequence length would mean latency, higher latency, and so on. But it could also mean higher accuracy in that sense. So that's that. And what people have shown is that vision transformers match or exceed residual networks on many image classification datasets, and therefore people have started using transformer models, vision transformer models, for encoding images as well. Okay. Now, you would be thinking, hey, where is multimodality here? But this was really important to build. There's no multimodality here so far. It was important to build so as to bring this notion that, yes, you could use transform models even to encode images. Right? And now here is our first multimodal model. It's called Visual BERT. Right? So the model is actually called Visual BERT. And as you can imagine, it sort of is going to integrate BERT for text and vision also as using transform model itself. Okay. So the idea is that you have to somehow understand how to pre-train this model. So Visual BERT is a pre-trained multimodal model. Now, if you remember BERT, how was it pre-trained? The pre-training goal was to be able to learn a task-agnostic language model such that it understands English like a second grade, third grade kid. Okay. And the way it was done, pre-training data is always obtained in a self-supervised manner, in the sense that there should be large amounts of this data and no extra human labeling required, right? Now, when you think about a multimodal pre-training, what you want is a model which can basically understand how to link, portions of those images or patches in those images with text words, right? So essentially, patches in images with words, right? So it should basically not just unlike BERT, which basically just needs to understand relationship between various words. Visual BERT needs to understand the relationship between these text words and the visual patches of images. Okay. How do you enable that? What kind of pre-trained data would you use? So what folks realized is that there's a whole bunch of image captioning data which is available, and therefore they said that, hey, we'll use image captioning data, image text pairs, so as to be able to pre-train this model. So you have images and you have a corresponding caption associated with it. So Visual BERT basically leveraged the MS COCO data, which is basically 120,000 images, along with each with 5 different captions, leading to a data set of 600,000 image text pairs, right? And they basically use the standard transformer encoder model to be able to train this pre-training, to do this pre-training. Okay, so the way they did this is basically to add. You see, there's a CLS token, and then there is the text caption which is going in as input, and there is, of course, the image pieces that are going in as input. Okay, now let's understand this step by step. So essentially, just like one would do mask language modeling in BERT, here they also mask text. So some text token, so that's obvious. And then text and images are separated by a separated token, which is also obvious. Now, what are these image pieces? Well, these image pieces basically are not tiles or patches, as you observed on the previous slide. But well, in their case, they actually used an object detection model called as faster RCNN, so as to basically take this image and divide it into different patches such that each patch actually captures a relevant object like a cap or a ball or a tennis racket or a shirt and so on. Okay, so they basically take objects which are returned by this faster RCNN model and pass them as inputs in as input image tokens. So what are your image words, so to say? Well, they are image tokens. They're basically objects as detected by the faster RCNN model, the faster RCNN object detector. Okay. Uh, now to encode these things, they have like three different kinds of things that go as input at every position. There is of course a position embedding that is obvious in any transformer model. There is also segment embedding, which basically tells you whether this is a text segment or an image segment. There's also a token or image embedding. So of course, there need to be some text features or image features that need to be passed. For tokens, basically it's the token embedding, and for images, it basically comprises of features from faster RCNN and so on. Okay, so all of this is combined and then fed to the standard transformer model, transformer encoder model, and then you basically pre-train this transformer model using two different objective functions. Yeah, we'll talk about these two objective functions next. The first one is very simple. It's just the masked language modeling. So masked language modeling, remember, no masked image modeling. So on the image side, you do not really hide any of those images, but on the text side, you mask these text pieces. And the idea is that just like in BERT, masked language modeling aims to be able to predict the masked word at the output at the same position by leveraging knowledge or borrowing knowledge from other tokens, unmasked tokens, right? In the same way, in Visual BERT, the idea is that at the same position, the model should be able to guess the hidden word or the masked word. By leveraging knowledge from the unmasked text words, and also, of course, all the image tokens, because none of the image tokens are masked. So, the accuracy here for masked language modeling should be ideally higher, because now the masked word, let's say the tennis racket, tennis can possibly be guessed not just based on racket and ball and so on, but also based on what the model sees in the image in that senses, right? So this knowledge should be able to help, improve the masked language modeling accuracy on the way, making the model learn how to relate this particular image with the word called tennis. Okay, so that's that. The second task is, and by the way, these masked, this objective one is going to be computed. Masked language modeling objective is going to be computed only on those tokens where the text words or text tokens were masked. Okay. Now, on the other hand, let's talk about this objective two. It's basically the sentence image prediction task. The idea is that you see, in a particular batch of samples, you would give image text pairs, but half of those pairs are going to be positive pairs, half of them are going to be negative pairs. Now, what is a positive pair? Positive pair basically means that the caption is linked with the image itself, and which means that it is similar, it is relevant for the image, right? And then the negative pair would be this caption is linked with the negative image, irrelevant image to the caption. Okay. For example, positive and negative pairs create a batch, and then the objective two is basically all about figuring out whether the MLP head out there is able to predict correctly whether this is a positive pair or a negative pair. Right. So that's basically that. Now, the interesting part about Visual BERT is that you could basically now look at the attention weights of some selected heads at the output layer, at the last layer. And then by looking at those attention weights, you can visualize them and try to see. Remember, in self-attention, you have like now words, text words paying attention to image pieces. And now you can try to see, how are they correlated? Okay, so let me look at layer 11, and you see this heat map is basically drawn by showing attention between text words you see there and image tokens you see there, right? So five image tokens, corresponding to man, which are also highlighted in this image, by the way. So the red one is man, the bluish one is shirt, and the bluish kind of stuff is sidewalk and so on, right? So what you observe is that, so if I look at the word man, right, fortunately, it has very high, attention weight for the box man, in that sense, is for the image piece man. Okay, and that's very useful and nice, because it sort of nicely tells us that the model is actually learning to correlate pieces in the image with the tokens in the text. Okay. So and so on. You can actually pause the video here and essentially observe that this holds also for other kinds of things like sidewalk, pedestrians, shirt, and so on. Okay. Now, after this, people tried to improve the architecture. They came up with this architecture new model called as Wilbert. Okay. By the way, you can also look at these papers. Most of my slides actually have citations for these papers at the bottom. Okay. So Wilbert basically believes in a two-tower model, unlike VisualBERT. VisualBERT was a single-tower model. The concatenation of text and image modalities sort of happened right in the first layer, right in the zeroth layer in that sense. Okay. But Wilbert basically believes in processing text separately using a few layers, transformer layers, as you see them here, and processing the image separately using a few layers. Now these layers could be, transformer layers and so on. Notice that the text stream in Wilbert actually has much more processing before interacting with the visual features. But as I was saying, well, it's a two-tower model where the text and image are processed separately in their own pipelines, but then there is also a fusion which happens where core transformer layers or co-attention-based transformer layers basically try to fuse the information across both the pipelines. Okay. And then there are other transformer layers further which basically do individual processing separately. Okay. Now, the interesting part is that this linguistic stream is basically BERT base, and BERT base, and then again for the visual stream, essentially you use faster RCNN to essentially figure out those image patches and so on. Okay, and this faster RCNN both in VisualBERT and Wilbert is pre-trained on visual genome dataset. Okay. Okay, so now how is this co-attention? How do these co-transformer layers work, right? So the standard transformer layer, it has the typical standard self-attention and feed forward, right, with the QKV, the query keys and values coming from a single stream, right? But in Wilbert, you have two different streams: the visual stream and then the linguistic stream, right? And what you do for transferring information across the two is to basically use the query of the same modality, but the keys and the values coming from the other modality, from the linguistic stream in this particular example, right? In this particular case. And in the other case, in the linguistic stream, again, you're going to use the query from the linguistic stream, but you're going to use the keys and the values from the visual stream, so as to essentially do this cross-pollination of information in the attention layer, right? And then, of course, you do this typical standard feed forward with all those residual connections, add and normalization, and so on. Okay. So that's how Wilbert works. Now, another interesting part about Wilbert is that rather than depending on manually labeled MS COCO data, they actually depended on conceptual captions data. This data set of conceptual captions is basically obtained in an automated manner by scraping things from the web. So the idea is that on the web there are Wikipedia pages, news articles, and many other web pages where you have an image, and underneath that there is a caption. Okay. There are also images with very nice alt tags associated with them. These serve as really good sources for caption information along with images, and that is what Wilbert guys basically leverage, so as to essentially create the visual grounding data, right? Visual image text pairs essentially, and then they pre-train the Wilbert model based on that. Now, in Wilbert model, again, there are two pre-training loss functions. So just like in VisualBERT, there is a multimodal alignment prediction function to basically just predict whether this image and text are aligned with each other or not. And that's basically the same as VisualBERT. So there's no difference in that sense, except the change in the name, right? But then on the other hand, the masked language modeling is actually now extended to become masked multimodal learning. Okay. The interesting part is that rather than just masking out text, you can actually also mask out image pieces. In 2019, there was no good technology to basically generate back image pieces themselves in the same position. But what you could do, or rather what Wilbert does, is to basically generate a distribution over a set of class labels. So of course, because you're using FRCNN, you know what particular object this particular position indicates, the image piece at this position indicates. And then the idea is that Wilbert, the goal or the objective is such that the Wilbert model is motivated to learn the right distribution over those objects at the output at the same position. Okay. If it learns, great. Else there is a backpropagation, cross entropy loss backpropagated. Right. So that's basically masked multimodal learning, a great extension from just the masked language modeling as done in VisualBERT. Okay. So that's great. Now, the idea behind Wilbert and VisualBERT so far is that you have image text pairs, and you could do a nice modeling of both the modalities together, and come up with these interesting embeddings in that senses, and hopefully it gives you good accuracies. However, over time, people have moved to using contrastive training, contrastive loss-based training, and that is what the CLIP model is also famous for. As it says, it's contrastive language image pre-training. Okay. So the way the CLIP model works is that it's also a two-tower model in that senses, and then it has a contrastive loss right at the very end in that senses. Okay. So you use, I mean, of course, you have a text caption and you have an image as well. So use the text captions is to basically pre-train a text encoder, or you use a pre-trained text encoder and you use it to encode the text in that senses. You use a pre-trained image encoder to encode the images, and then so in their particular case, in fact, they essentially used a 12-layer transformer for the text encoder, and for the image encoder, well, they actually experimented with quite a few. So there are 5 ResNets. They still believed in convolution neural networks, and 3 different VIT models. So VIT base and VIT large with different patch sizes, 32, 16, and 14, as you see. Okay. And then what do? They basically pre-train this with a contrastive loss that I'm going to explain very soon, using 400 million web image text pairs. Okay, so the dataset is called web image text, and basically has 400 million image comma text pairs. Okay. So you see, I mean, VisualBERT was on 600k image text pairs, WillBERT on 3 million, CLIP is basically on 400 million. And the interesting part is it also uses contrastive loss to do pre-training. Okay. Now, the way this pre-training works is that you have text tokens, and you have embeddings for each of those text tokens at different positions from the text encoder. It's just 12-layer transformer. You also have image tokens, and you have a representation for each of those for various image pieces, right? So what you do is basically you try to compare these and by the way, from a batch of n instances. Let's say if I have a batch of n samples, so consider n real pairs, real image text pairs, n samples in a batch. Okay. What you're going to do is to basically take a pooled text embedding, a pooled image embedding, and you're going to compute cosine similarities between them. So I1.T1, I1.T2. So given a batch, let's say batch of 20, you're basically going to end up with 400 similarities because you have a 20 image embeddings and 20 text embeddings. You get like 400 different similarities. Of course, what you know is that there are only 20 pairs. So therefore, there are only 20 positive pairs, right? And if you really did all of this, 20 cross 20 kind of computation, you have like 400 minus 20, 380 negative pairs. What you want to do is to maximize the cosine similarity of the image and text embeddings of n real pairs versus minimizing cosine similarity of the embeddings of the incorrect pairings, right? So 380 incorrect pairing. So you want to maximize those 20, the diagonal, right, and minimize the similarity for those remaining 380 which are negative, right? So this is what gives basically awesome accuracy values. In fact, CLIP was tested on 30 plus computer vision tasks like OCR, action recognition videos, and so on and so forth. And they basically found CLIP to be really doing very well, even in a zero shot manner. Okay. It was better than it was found to be better than even fully supervised baselines. Okay. So here is more details about CLIP. So essentially, as you notice here, we have so essentially you can actually use CLIP even for zero shot classes and for classification problems which basically involve new classes at test time. Okay, so for example, what you could do is that you can take an image and let's say you have some new class labels, right, at test time, and you want to figure out if this new test time class label holds good for this image or not. Okay, all you need to do is to basically take that class label, pass it through a text encoder, and the text encoder learns a text embedding, and then and this is at inference time, by the way, right? So basically, you take the image, pass it through the image encoder, get an image embedding, and just try to compute the similarities. Whichever has the highest similarity is the one that you actually predict as the right caption or the right text class label for this particular image. Okay. That's that. Now, the interesting part, so what they did was to compare a zero-shot CLIP with the ResNet 50 supervised model across several of these data sets. So notice CLIP is zero-shot. It's not fine-tuned on any of these data sets, but ResNet is not zero-shot. I mean, it's actually, you take the pre-trained ResNet and fine-tune it on the training set of these data sets. And what they observed is that among these data sets, several of these data sets, CLIP actually gives you a positive improvement, significantly positive improvements compared to ResNet. Okay. Here are a few examples based on how clip performs. So here's an example from Food 101 dataset. Nicely predicts that this particular food is not any of those, but guacamole, right? And then you can also use it for other kinds of classification problems, like classifying what setting is this? Is it a television studio, podium indoor, conference room, lecture room, control room, and so on? You could also basically try to figure out what particular object is highlighted in the image, or you could basically use it for classifying the land use type. So whether it is a permanent cropland, pasture land, highway or road, or ocean, or shrubland, and so on and so forth. Okay, so that's clip. Okay. Well, now similar kind of models have also been trained and used for doing document understanding, visually rich document understanding, right? So these are scans of various kinds of documents. So for example, what you see here is essentially some sort of a key value pairs highlighted in this interesting clearance sheet as such, but you could also have scans for invoices and so on, okay? The interesting part is that using a model popularly called as layout LM, of course, I'll also talk a little bit about on the next few slides, right? What one could do is to nicely extract the key value pairs from this document. Okay. One can also basically do question answering on these documents. So here is a postcard scan, and you could basically then ask questions like mention the zip code written, and then it can nicely figure out that the zip code is that. You can also ask it for the date on the seal at the top, and it nicely figures out the seal and so on and so forth, the date on the seal. Okay. You could also use it for legal contract management in that sense is that given document scans, you could basically ask it to highlight what are the important legal phrases that I must be paying attention to, or extract just key value pairs. So basically which parties signed the document or when was it signed and so on. Okay. Uh, of course, if you have lots of documents on users' OneDrive or Google Drive accounts, you could try to build an app which can classify those documents or categorize them into popular categories like personal identification documents like passport and PAN cards and so on. While one other category could just be all kinds of invoices, utility bills, and so on. Right? You could, of course, also use these kinds of models to do recognition over Walmart receipts or any other supermarket receipts in that senses. Now, the main model for doing this kind of visually rich document processing, a very popular model is layout LM. And, there are, of course, various versions, layout LM V1, V2. There's also a layout LLM in that senses, motivate you folks to go ahead and look at it later. But what is interesting is that it basically uses transformer models. Okay, in their particular case, they used a transformer called as UniLM-V2 to initialize, and of course, then they basically took domain-specific data, layout, visually rich layout data, and they basically try to train this model using document-specific loss functions as well. Okay. So very broadly, what they do is to take the document and they mask out certain lines on this document. So they hide out certain lines. I'll call them hidden out lines in that senses. Okay. Then they basically also, so this hidden out, image is divided into different parts and then encoded using a visual encoder. Right. On the other hand, you take you basically take the document and then you take the lines from the document, and essentially for the lines which are not covered, you basically have for each line you basically have this notion whether it is covered or not. You are when they hide out, they don't hide out partial lines, they hide out an entire line and so on. Okay, so you have a covered line and a non-covered line. Okay. And what you do is to basically take the document and you have a OCR or PDF parser which gives you text. So that's how you get these text tokens. So you basically have the text tokens, and you can of course do masked language modeling. So therefore some tokens are masked as well. Remember, the hiding part is different from masking part. Okay. Of course, you can mask out text token. So the OCR is actually done on the non-hidden version of the document, so that the OCR quality is good in that senses, right? But then you have this information which line is hidden or not. Okay. Now, as you see, the transformer is being passed 4 different things. So, of course, the first one is basically segment embeddings, whether it is basically processing image tokens versus is it processing, text tokens. And then on the text tokens also, you could basically say whether it is a masked token or a non-masked token, yellow or blue. Right. Of course, you pass a 1D position embedding. So essentially, you must pass some notion of position, right? You also pass 2-dimensional position embeddings for the box. So, for example, for the text tokens, essentially, for the image tokens, you have a box. So essentially, XYWH, and you can actually also encode width and height of the box as part of the 2D position embeddings for the and then for the CLS token, you actually pad with the box with all the 6 things: x min, x max, y min, y max, and height and width initialized to all zeros, set to all zeros, right? Okay. So that's that. So that's how you basically have 2D position embeddings. Then you also have the text and visual embedding. So essentially, you use mass RCNN embeddings because you're using that as the visual encoder here, right? And for the text, you basically just use the standard text embeddings. Okay. Now the transformer, yes, they experiment with the 2 different models: base size and large size, 12 layers and 24 layers, and basically, which means 200 million or 426 million parameters. Okay. So now, pre-training objectives. So there are 3 different pre-training objectives: masked visual language modeling, right? Which is the typical, you can mask the images part or the text part, and you can try to, I think in their particular case, I think they just hid the text part, so therefore visual language modeling. So if you mask these text tokens, you will basically try to predict them, what is the text, right? Text image alignment. So essentially, they are just predicting whether a particular token belongs to the covered class or the not covered class. So remember, you basically covered some lines. So this text token belongs to the covered class versus these ones belong to not covered class. Okay. And then lastly, you have text image matching. So essentially, whether this particular image and the text match with each other or not, just like the visual BERT and the Wilbert models. Okay. Those are 3 classes. Now, of course, the pre-training data, they obtained like 11 million scanned documents, and they use the text OCR Microsoft Read API for the OCR part. Okay. And that's how Layout LM v2 basically does an awesome job, and essentially is used to pre-train a model which does very awesome visually rich document processing. Okay, so far I've talked about text and images. Now let me quickly talk about video tasks. Multimodality could also mean, doing things about video and text. So for example, text video retrieval, given a text and a collection of videos, find the relevant ones. Now this requires text embedding and video embedding, both of them together in the same space. Okay. Multiple choice video question answering. So again, given a video and a question and multiple candidate answers, you want to choose which is the best one. It's analogous to image question, visual question answering, which typically just relates with an image in that sense. Okay. And then you could also have other kinds of tasks like action segmentation, action step localization, and so on, where you basically have an action which is described in text, and then you have a video and you want to figure out where the action is in that sense. It's also called as moment detection in that sense. Okay, so how do you do this? Now, the ideas are pretty similar. You see, I mean, if you really think about it, what is a video? Video is a sequence of image frames. Okay. So in some ways, if you basically are thinking about an image as a 3D bitmap, where an image has a height and a width, and basically the depth is basically just three, because you have to incorporate 3 channels, RGB, red, green, and blue, right? A video with 100 frames can be thought again as a 3D bitmap or a 3D cube, where you have, of course, the height and the width, but you also have a depth, which is basically 3 times 100 if there are 100 frames in the video. Okay, so you could really think about a video as a 3-dimensional cube in that senses, right? And in that senses, you could basically then use your 3D convolution neural networks to encode this video, or you could actually also use latest advances, in transformer models just to be able to encode this video. Of course, so as I mentioned, video is basically a whole bunch of image frames, but there is also a sequence to them, and 3D CNNs help you sort of ensure that that sequence is also respected when you're trying to encode the video. Right? But again, this session is not on video encoding, so I'm not really going to go into deep details about how do you encode videos. There's so many interesting models, all the way starting from very old models like i3D, inflated 3D models and 3D convets and so on, to the more recent ones. But the idea is, let's say that you have a video encoder, right? And you have a text encoder. So, and you could basically do the same contrastive loss kind of training, the same noise, the typical popular noise contrastive estimation loss basically can be used also for doing something called as video clip. Okay, just like you have the clip for image and text pairs, you could also have a video clip which basically tries to do contrastive learning with video and text pairs. Okay. Now, the idea is that where do you get these video and text pairs, right? So you could, of course, basically make use of transcripts. So you have video and the visual information, and you have transcript, and you could make use of the two to align them. But one has to be a little cautious about this because, typically if let's say even in this lecture video, I started off saying that, hey, in this video, I would talk about, multimodal models. But when I talked about that visually on the slide, you couldn't see any multimodal for that matter, right? Similarly, if I'm making a recipe video, I'm going to say that, hey, I'm going to basically teach you how to cook chole bhature, right? And at that time on the slide, there's no chole bhature at all, right? I mean, chole bhature come much later, okay? Or essentially, the idea is that the speech and what you see on the video may not be completely aligned always, and therefore you have to be a little cautious about how do you align and how do you get those positive pairs versus the negative pairs. But otherwise, more or less, the contrastive estimation, contrastive loss, and so on work the same way. And in fact, in their particular case, in video clip, they basically use the 6-layer. They use the BERT-based uncased for both the video and text. They just use the transformer model for encoding the video as well. Okay. And the way they did that was to basically use a frozen pre-trained CNN, so as to essentially encode the image frames, and then they projected those video tokens to the size and the dimensionality and the space that BERT-base desires by doing an MLP projection layer, by training an MLP projection layer. Okay. So that's that. They pre-trained on how to 100 million data set, and that's basically how they pre-trained video clip. Next, almost sort of towards sort of trying to moving towards more and more modality. Let me talk about this image bind model. Okay. So far we have talked about multiple models. I start off with simple vision transformers, right? And I basically said, hey, well, they can be used for encoding images. Then I talked about Wilbert and Visual BERT, and I basically said, well, they can be used for encoding multimodal tasks involving images and text. And then we, of course, also talked about clip in the same theme. Okay. Then I talked about video clip, and basically I said, well, you could extend this to two modalities, not image and text this time, but video and text. Okay. Now the obvious question is that, hey, can I include more modalities? And there are so many tasks with multiple modalities. Okay. So for example, here are various modalities. An image bind, here is a model called image bind, which basically tries to extend this kind of a thing to 6 different modalities. These ones are images, text, audio, depth. So this is the depth image, right? Thermal and inertial measurement unit. Okay. Images, text, audio are obvious. What is a depth image? Depth image basically tells you how far away from the camera each pixel is. Okay. So essentially, white tells you that it is very close to the camera, but black tells you that it is very far away from the camera. Okay. That's a depth image. You could also try to bring in a modality called thermal. Now, thermal modality, you might have heard about FLIR images. FLIR images, so they're basically used a lot in infrared imaging for electrical circuits. You want to figure out is there a fault or not, right? So FLIR images basically make use of these infrared cameras so as to also record temperature at every pixel in some ways. And that's why thermal images in that sense, right? You could also have IMU, inertial measurement unit kind of data. I mean, this is more like time series data, sensor data in that senses, which you could get. Let's say if you're trying to build a driverless car application, you might not just want to use the the input from the camera, but you might also want to use several sensors data coming from several sensors inside the car, right? So as to be able to make a decision, for example, whether to press a brake or not, right? So that's basically multiple modalities of data, and in several applications, you may not require processing all the modalities, but some of those modalities suddenly become important. Okay. And what image by so therefore the idea is that it is a great idea to basically learn a model which can process all the modalities, right? And here's an inspiring statement why this could be useful, and how to do this, right? So of course, many applications require a combination of these modalities. The challenge, though, is that there is no data set across all of these modalities, right? So although I might want to basically compare or build an application which basically uses thermal images along with the sensor data, unfortunately, I might not have aligned data there. Okay, but what is really interesting is that image binds it all. Okay. An image of a beach can actually remind us of the sound of the waves, audio, right? The texture of the sand, right? a breeze, so or even inspire a poem, text and so on. So you see, different modalities can be all linked to images in some ways. Okay. So that is also shown in this animation here. So if you basically just look at the image, if you basically can just get the image text, image depth, image heat map, image audio, image IMU pairs, maybe what you can do is to solve this problem of not requiring pairwise data across all possible modalities, right? So if there are six different modalities, as you see, you would require 62 different different types of data. Image text data, image audio data, text audio data, text IMU data, and so on. But maybe if you basically just go via images, you could basically solve this problem. And that's what ImageBind banks on. So they basically make use of a whole bunch of image data combined with another modality data so as to be able to train a really, really awesome multimodal model. And that multimodal model now helps them to do not just a multimodal understanding, but also helps them to do multimodal generation. Okay? Now, multimodal generation is, of course, a topic for another lecture, and we'll talk about that later. But here are some examples. So cross-modal retrieval. So essentially, if you basically just pass on this audio, which is essentially of a crackle of a fire, you can basically try to retrieve these kinds of images or videos which actually show the crackle of a fire, or also retrieve these depth images which basically relate with a fireplace and so on, as you can understand from the image, right? You can also retrieve, these text pieces, which are all talking about fire. A fire crackles while a pan. And remember, this is not basically because the text called crackle of a fire was used to search, but because the audio relating, audio which basically just is the sound of the crackle of a fire basically helps you retrieve the text. Okay, this is not speech to text, by the way. So in the audio crackle of a fire, those words were not spoken. All that was there in the audio is the sound of the fire in that sense. Okay. So, of course, it can also be used for doing embedding space arithmetic. So you could basically have this image of a crane or a bird, right? And you can have sound of waves, right? And then can actually generate images which can actually, basically the same bird in the sea or on the shore and so on. Okay. You could also use this kind of a model for audio to image generation. So given an audio, can you generate an image, barking audio, generate a dog, or, train audio, generate a train image, and so on and so forth. Okay. So how is the ImageBind model trained? Well, as I mentioned, the model is basically trained by using several kinds of data sets, also mentioned here, which basically relate visual modality with everything else. So with other modalities, for example, video and audio from a dataset called audio set, image depth kind of relationship from some other dataset, image thermal from another dataset, video IMU data, image text data, and so on and so forth. Okay. The model is basically, of course, it uses a large deep neural networks so as to encode the image and also any other modality. So encode the image and any other modality M. And it uses the same info-NC contrastive loss. So, essentially, just like a video clip or clip, they basically use a symmetric version of the info-NC loss, where noise contrastive estimation, right? Where you take both the image versus the other modality and modality versus the other image versus the image and so on, right? So the loss is particularly given as follows. That's basically ensuring that the positive pairs essentially have a higher similarity compared to negative pairs, which you see. Of course, in the denominator you have both, right? So that's that. Now, so essentially for ImageBind, for the text encoder, essentially for the image encoder, they use the VIT-H, the huge model, 630 million parameters. And for the text encoder, they basically used a 302 million parameters from OpenClip. I think for training, they, as far as I remember, they froze the text encoder part, but then they trained the other modalities in that senses. That's that. So they use the same encoder for images plus videos, basically where videos are just treated as multi-frame images. Right. That's that. Okay, so more or less, this is what I had for you for this session. Quickly summarizing, in this session, I talked about a whole bunch of models. I first motivated essentially why multimodal modeling is important by talking about various vision and language tasks like visual question answering, visual common sense reasoning, referring expressions, caption-based image retrieval. multimodal hate speech detection, multimodal fake news detection, and so on. Then we talked about vision transformers, which is basically modeled to use transformers to encode images. Then we talked about three different models for encoding images, namely visual BERT, wilbert, and clip, right? Where and in that order they have been pre-trained using larger and larger image text pairs, right? Lastly, or rather, next I talked about visually rich document understanding using this particular model called as layout LM, um, layout LMV2 particularly, right? And then next we talked about video tasks, extending multimodality to video and text combinations, right? And then therefore we talked about video clip, an obvious extension of the standard clip model. Um, Lastly, I talked about image bind. Hey, by the way, image bind, of course, deals with 6 different modalities, but there are other models which can actually deal with more modalities. For example, I think if I remember correctly, there is a model. Of course, there's a model called text bind. By the way, right? There's also a model called as meta transformers. There is also yet another model called as composable diffusion, right? So if you try to search for these models, you will basically see that people have tried to extend this to many more modalities, not just 6. People have tried, I think, 10 plus modalities in those papers. Okay. So hopefully, this session motivates you to read up more of those papers in multimodal modeling and and potentially also do research in this area, right? I'm of course always excited to work in this area. So if you want to do more research in this area, feel free to reach out to me on these coordinates. You will also find, by the way, on my YouTube channel, a whole bunch of videos around multimodality. So feel free to check them out as well. Okay, thanks so much, and happy to take questions.